Are high gas prices becoming a problem? Well, we think we have found the smart solution. That's this week on Motoring 2000.
TSN's Motoring 2000 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
Geneva, Switzerland, considered the international business capital of Europe. It's also home to the Geneva Auto Show, and this week we get our first visit to what many consider the premier auto show in Europe. But you know, when we were flying over, a flight attendant who spends a lot of time visiting Europe told me how much she enjoys all the European small cars, and she wondered, why don't we see any of them in North America? Well, this week we're going to check out the auto show, have a look at those European cars, and find out why most of them will never leave home.
The Geneva Auto Show is one of the most prestigious in the world. You know, it's in the middle of Europe, in the middle of the year, and everybody wants to show a new concept, you know, just before the fall, and that's very important for the business, for the industry in Europe. To have very rich people, you know, Switzerland is the safe of the world. You know, all the money of the world is here, and if you want to pick a Bentley, a Lamborghini, or a Ferrari, this is the right place.
Do you think some of these cars, though, the manufacturers would be smart to bring them to North America or not? I mean, is it possible?
You know, it's depend on the safety issue. You know, all these cars doesn't meet the safety regulation in North America. And you know, if the price of gasoline continue to raise, perhaps it will be a good idea to bring this small car home.
We'd probably see a greater variety of these kinds of cars in the U.S. and Canada if, frankly, gasoline was a lot more expensive in the States. Clearly, there's such a difference between gasoline prices where we're at $1.50 a gallon, and over here it's $4.50 to $5 a gallon. And I think that drives a great selection or selectivity, if you will, in the cars that are shipped into the U.S. and North America in general.
The honest answer, frankly, I think the Canadian government is very anal when it comes to that sort of stuff. We've got no safety regulations for motorcycles. They don't bat an eyelid. They can bring in pretty much what they want. As long as they're clean cars, why not let them bring over stuff from Europe?
Well, sometimes I think in North America we're a little too narrow in our view of our car needs. When you look around at the proliferation of design and the sizes available, if they, in this case, not built it, but rather brought it, people would come.
Well, we're sort of like a pimple on the camel's backside because we only represent about 10% of North American sales, and yet our standards are different from the US. Why not have a North American standard? That way, whatever's allowed in the US is allowed into Canada, and vice versa. It would make life a lot simpler, and there would be some really interesting and exotic cars come over.
What fascinates me about the European shows and the European approach to problem solving is that they are so clever and their approaches are so unique and out of the box and fresh. Not to do a commercial for Fiat, but that's the Fiat Multipla, and this is one of those very unique answers to problem solving. It provides a tremendous amount of interior volume with a minimum exterior space, and albeit a little wiggy exterior appearance.
I've always said that when you come to the Geneva Car Show, it's about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on.
The most fun you can have with your clothes on? Well, anyway, the question was, why don't we get some of those great cars in Canada? Well, I'll strip that one down to the bare facts later on Kenzie's Corner.
You know, considering the brakes and the knobbly tyres, and I just forgot what I was going to say. You know, considering the knobbly tyres and the fact that this is an off-road vehicle, the brakes are more than up to snuff.
Welcome to Motoring 88.
Thanks, Brad.
Now, I know you're testing cars each week, but even I know this is not a car.
No, that's right. This is one of the latest 4x4s. It's the fastest growing segment in the industry right now.
You know, that test drive was back in the fall of '87, our very first ever test drive. Both I and the Pathfinder have changed considerably since that hokey debut.
The Pathfinder is always ranked at the top of the list of sport utility vehicles I like. The original version had a hard-edged style that set it apart from the crowd. Sadly, as it's aged, that style has become ever more a case, well, it's the same old, and so it is with the 2001 model. Quibbles about the style aside, however, Nissan have made some significant improvements.
You know, my biggest peeve with the previous Pathfinder was the 3.3-litre V6 that powered it. It was quite simply too truck-like for its own good. That, however, is a thing of the past, as Nissan have now shoehorned a 3.5-litre version of the Maxima engine under the new hood. That engine brings 250 horsepower and has to be considered one of the 10 best engines in the world.
The new engine features a variable intake system and continuously variable valve timing. The combination spreads the torque and horsepower out over a very broad range. Depending upon the transmission, the power ratings change. When married to the 5-speed manual, you get 250 horses and 240 pounds-feet of torque. Hook up the Slush-O-Matic and you lose 10 horses, but gain in the torque department, meaning a stump pulling 265 pounds-feet. The result is a sprint to the 100k mark in less than 9 seconds and a towing capacity of 5,000 pounds when properly equipped.
Inside, Nissan have cleaned up the Pathfinder quite effectively. First of all, a decent set of white-face gauges. You get automatic climate control and a radio that sounds rather nice. The problem is they've put the radio below the automatic climate control. You'll note the word automatic. Until they come up with an automatic radio, why not give it the place of prominence? The other move that they've made for the better, they've imported the all-mode four-wheel drive system from the Infiniti QX4. Now this thing operates completely seamlessly to the driver and has to be considered one of the best systems offered. Another move for the better is the installation of a side airbag. The one thing they forgot to do, improve the rear seat. There's no thigh support, so it's still very uncomfortable.
Stopping power comes from an anti-lock assisted front disc rear drum design. The use of a G-force sensor prevents the anti-lock from intervening prematurely when you're out rock crawling. Ride comfort and handling remain one of the Pathfinder's fortes. The front strut and multi-link rear design absorb the rough stuff remarkably well without making the handling overly mushy. As a result, you don't feel as though you're about to keel over when pushing through a fast sweeper. Again, given the truck basics and origins, the variable assist rack and pinion steering ranks as one of the better weighted systems around. While the turn-ins are not lightning fast, they are reassuring.
You know, with the improvements Nissan have made to this new Pathfinder, it's almost good enough to convince you that an SUV purchase makes sense. That is, until you think about the price of gas.
It's time to update our long-term Hyundai Accent. And who says you can't find a good-looking small car in North America? You know, I love the first-generation Accent, and my opinion hasn't changed with this new one. It's a fun car to drive. But I do have a pet peeve, and it concerns the radio. First of all, you should take a course just to learn how to figure this radio out. But I have small fingers, and it's still a stretch just trying to touch these little buttons. And if you've got gloves on, well, it's simply impossible. My advice? Buy aftermarket. It was just over a year ago when Renault unveiled this concept vehicle at the Birmingham Auto Show to celebrate 100 years of innovation.
The car as such will not come out, but you will find both conceptually and stylistically strong elements coming out into production. So in fact, there's a lot more that will come out into production than most people believe. Well, the concept has become production because what we are showing here today are some of the pre-series, which are the vehicle very, very close to the concept car that we showed indeed 1 year ago. I don't think there has been many concept cars in the past who have gone into production being so close to the original concept. It's a design that stands out and that you instantly memorize. I mean, once you've seen Avantime, you close your eyes and you can reconstruct it either mentally, or if you can draw, you can actually draw it. It's not the case in many cars. So many cars, you've seen them and then you've forgotten them. The powertrain is, we're going to go from 2-liter gasoline engine to 3-liter V6. It will have both a mechanical gearbox and also automatic. And automatic is becoming more and more popular in Europe. And I think it's going to be an enjoyable car to drive.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns the various information stickers found all over a modern vehicle. For example, on this Pontiac Grand Prix, underneath the trunk lid are 2 stickers that I often look for. This one on the left describes the original tire size for this vehicle and the correct inflation pressures. It also tells you the maximum cargo load on this vehicle, which is 917 pounds, and you can carry up to 5 occupants. In other words, there's 5 sets of seat belts. When you're replacing tires, for example, very important to consult this one to make sure that you're replacing with the correct size, not the one that may be on the car right now. This decal over here is what we call the option list, and you can see a whole series of 3-character codes on here that are very important when you're replacing certain components on the car. For example, when you're looking for brake and suspension components, the dealer will quite often ask you for the J option if it's the brakes, or the F option if it's suspension or steering components. And without these options, you could easily get the wrong parts or not be able to source the parts at all. So it's very important to keep these decals in good shape and retain them with the vehicle. Now, where does it go wrong? Well, at the beginning, rust-proofing guys like to spray these things over with tar. Oil change guys like to cover the ones on the driver's door with their information decal for when the last oil change was done. And body shops are famous for painting them over or throwing them out completely. For example, if the vehicle was in a rear-end collision and the trunk lid was destroyed, this would go in the garbage with these decals with it. So when you take your vehicle in for servicing, particularly if it's a paint job or collision damage, tell those guys you want those things back. You want them transferred, replaced, or at very least, cut that piece of sheet metal right out if the trunk lid's going in the garbage, and retain those things. They're very important. That's your Midas tip of the week.
If you're big into cars, check out motoringtv.com, and while you're at it, download a copy of Autopilot. Autopilot software searches out the matches to your automotive interest and makes the most of your online time. It was introduced in 1998, quickly sold 80,000 units, and without a doubt, the Smart Car is Europe's most talked about new vehicle.
The Smart Car is a very new car, even in the European scene of traffic. It's one of the smallest cars, and it's a special car for the city, for the traffic, perhaps. In cities in Italy, in very ancient cities with very narrow roads. The engine was developed by our colleagues from the Daimler Chrysler Group. We have 2 engines, a gasoline engine and a diesel engine. The diesel engine is the smallest in the world with the new common rail technology. The gasoline engine, there are 2 versions, 33 and 40 kilowatt. And the diesel engine about 35 kilowatt, and the engine is in the rear of the car, and only in this way it's possible to have such a short car. One of the most important questions in the European market is small car, unsafe car. And we are very proud to be one of the best cars considering passive safety. We have 2 airbags. We have an option, 2 additional side bags. I don't think that the traffic in the United States needs such a car, because, okay, the traffic is very crowded, but the streets are very big, and you don't have the problem with a very narrow streets. I would not think that the Smart would be a big success in America if you consider the whole country, but maybe in some regions, maybe in California, some small regions, maybe.
You know, the advertising folk came up with a unique way to market the smart car when it debuted. They had many of their people drive smart cars around cities just like Geneva. And if you happen to see when you got to call them over, hop in the driver's seat and go for a test drive. And they sold many smart cars in this manner. Now, I'd like to suggest to Porsche they do exactly the same thing in my neighborhood. Nah, I didn't think so. All right, let's head to the garage and join Bill Gardiner.
Brad, do you think I'd even fit in one of those things? I'll tell you, we would have laughed at cars that looked like that a while ago, but I'll tell you, if fuel prices keep going any higher, I think we'll all be considering something that small. Anyhow, we've got an email to answer this week from viewer Mark Jones in Montreal. He's got a 1994 Toyota 4Runner, and his question concerns oil change. He says it recently had the oil change on his 4Runner, and he decided to change to a synthetic oil that Toyota was offering. One thing I've noticed is how much darker the oil is after only 1,000 kilometers. Is this normal? The regular oil I used before was almost the same color when I had the oil changed. Well, Mark, I think I'm thinking something totally different than what you're expecting to hear. And what I'm thinking is that your previous motor oil was probably not doing as good a job as it could have or should have, as opposed to something wrong with the synthetic you're using. Now, one of the key properties to motor oil is detergency. It's a very important property, and that's the ability of the motor oil to not only lubricate the engine, but to dissolve and hold in suspension all the contaminants that are normally occurring in an internal combustion engine. Hold them in suspension, wash them off those parts, and allow them to be held in suspension so that the next time you change the oil, they can be drained out and held in suspension so that they can circulate around and get taken out by the engine oil filter during normal engine operation. Now, if your previous oil was not discoloring during those oil change intervals, I'd be worried about the fact that maybe its detergency was not as good as it could have been. And I think what's happened is this new synthetic that you've changed to probably has increased detergency. That would be a normal thing to expect. And it is now dissolving and holding in suspension some of those contaminants that deposited themselves on the engine oil pan, on the valve covers, and on various castings in the engine. They're all sitting there kind of hardened, and this new oil is probably dissolving them and keeping them in suspension. And that is what motor oil is intended to do. Now, immediately upon changing the oil, that new oil is at its maximum detergency, and it has the ability to dissolve those particles quite well. Now, I'd be looking at that old motor oil and wondering if maybe it wasn't up to scratch. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardiner for Motoring 2000.
I think that a station wagon, especially an all-wheel drive station wagon, has not been sold to the public. Yeah, I would prefer to own a station wagon to a sport utility. In the car business, as anybody in any part of the car business will tell you, emotion is critical, and they don't have it with station wagons yet. Now, what Volvo needs to do is find a way to create an image for the company that says wagons are cool.
Yeah, that Geneva show, it's everybody's favorite. The venue is small and kind of cozy. And of course, there are all those great cars that we just don't get over here. It's like the boys are saying, why can't we get Renaults and Citroens and Fiats like they do? Well, a big part of the reason is they don't meet our safety standards. But you know, there is hope for the future because as time goes on, we're finding that these safety standards are starting to converge. I mean, nobody wants to die in a crash. Another issue has always been emission controls, but hey, the Europeans don't want pollution any more than we do, and we're finding those standards are starting to become more standardized across the world, and that's a good thing. But there's another thing The car companies are starting to converge as well. I mean, we've got Ford owning just about every high-end European manufacturer there is, a Jaguar, Volvo, and Aston Martin. We've got Renault is now being run by Nissan, so there's some opportunity for some influence of Renault in the Nissan designs in the coming years. And even as we speak, General Motors and Fiat are looking at a tie-up of some sort. Maybe we'll get some of those cool little Fiats and brilliant Alfa Romeos back in this country again. And there's another issue we have to deal with, though, and that is the cultural issue. Europeans simply are better drivers than we are. They drive faster than we do, and they demand cars with higher standards of handling and ride. On the other hand, their cars are really expensive for what they get. So maybe there's an opportunity as the car companies start becoming more world-oriented, we'll get European-style handling with North American-style value. Now, of course, if it takes a $2 gallon of gasoline to make that happen, well, hey, it'll also get some of these sport utilities off the road, and you know I'm not going to complain about that. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, our first trip to the Geneva Auto Show is over, and I can tell you, I can see every reason now why this is considered one of the top shows in the world. It is simply super. Now, as for all these European cars that we never get to drive, well, let's face it, we've got some terrific cars in North America. But what bothers me is that every year we seem more concerned with building that indestructible tank. Whereas here in Europe, sure, a car still gets you from point A to point B, but why not have fun while doing it? And hey, who's to argue with that? Well, that's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
The announcement that they're going to put Honda engines in General Motors cars. Well, if you want a car with a Honda engine, why not buy a Honda? What is the point of buying a General Motors car with a Honda engine? And what are all those people in powertrain doing if they have to buy 6-cylinder engines from a Japanese competitor?
It's got 555 horsepower, and it will be at the top end, obviously, price-wise as well, as far as the group is concerned.
TSN's Motoring 2000 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas Car Care, the way it should be.